And now Lauren Peters is going to be introducing our main speaker, Father John Deere.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I was poking around the internet and found some interesting comments about John. Quote, John Deere has walked where holy words lead, to a high mountain of instruction, into the desert of 40 days, into the garden of anguish. He has poured his blood on nuclear weaponry and has paid up in kangaroo courts and unspeakable jails. He has trekked about the world, bearing the gospel in hand and heart, a wing-shod messenger of peace. He has lived in solidarity with the wretched of the earth, whose plight, as he well knows, is the mean feat of abominable economics and killer instincts on rampage. In this century, in this land, cleft in fragments of gigantic disorder, what a witness. Daniel Berrigan. The other quote that I'd like to share is from President Jimmy Carter. The Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount are Jesus' blueprint for peace. I urge everyone to study John Deere's beautiful reflections, the Beatitudes of Peace, and join his campaign of peace and nonviolence. Thank you. John?
Thank you, Lord. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming out and being here. Isn't this exciting?
Yes.
I'm so happy to be back here in Berkeley and to see so many nice friends, and especially our fearless leader. Please join me in giving a round of applause to Denise. Come on. Is Father Ivan here in the room? It's okay if you're not. Stand up, Father Ivan. You very bravely welcome me here. I hope it's not a setback for the Church of Berkeley that I am here. And so many other friends, and it's so nice to see you all. And I asked Denise how long I had to speak. Could I speak for 7 hours? She said no. 6 hours? But anyway, she has a focus all the time. This is, I'm trying so you can hear me. Can you hear me? You know, this is reminded me of the joke, which I probably told some of you, about the young priest who's giving his first homily and he's really nervous and he comes to the microphone and he taps on the microphone and says, something's wrong with this microphone, and the congregation goes, and also with you. Sorry, Father Adam. It's just amazing for me to be back here. For some of those of you who knew me, I was a kid at the GTU and the JSTB in 1989. Wow. And there were days, because I got here and my friends, the Jesuits in El Salvador, were killed, and we were doing demonstrations every day. And then the first Iraq War happened, and then I got Mother Teresa to call the governor. I don't know if some of you remember this. And then, you know, in the Jesuit School of Theology, they made me do an intern project. And I said, I want to start Pax Christi in the Bay Area. And that's when I met Denise, like 47 years ago. No, it was a long time ago. And she had 25 Pax Christi groups. Isn't that fantastic? Yeah. And I see some of you today, and this podium is rocking, so I can step back. It's going to get rough. But, you know, Pax Christi, it's such a great thing. And we're going to need it all over again as the times get worse and worse. Why? Community of like-minded people. And they have a little motto: prayer, study, and action. So in all our groups, that's all you had to do was meet for 1 hour every 2 or 3 weeks with Parks Street. Right, Denise? Remember all that? And we prayed. You had some friends to pray together. And some friends to talk about what's happening in the world together, like Gaza and all. And you had some friends to do something with. You're not alone. And so one of my hopes for this morning is that you all get to know each other. And you can all become friends because it's going to be a hard time ahead. So I think because it's so important to me, I'm going to take a minute and a half, turn to the people next to you, introduce yourselves, and I want you all to get to know each other by the end. Everybody here, we're all going to be friends because we need each other and build community, and maybe talk to Denise afterwards and start a Pax Christi group in your parish or in your town, right, Denise? And this is a very simple way. Do it for yourselves and your friends, you know, to help you through the days ahead. I just want to thank all of you for all that you do for peace and justice, and for our poor church, and for the poor in the Bay Area, and for God and poor Jesus, and to keep at it. That's your assignment, to keep going. You'll forgive me, I'm a big name dropper. 10 years ago, I went to see my friend Archbishop Tutu in South Africa, and I walked into the room, no hello, he just came up and grabbed me by the collar and goes, "John, you better work for justice and peace till the day you die." Are there any questions? That's my message. Maybe I can give you a few little notes here before I jump into what I want to talk about. But it's just so thrilling to be back here because we had a Pax Christi group here. But how many of you remember I brought my friend Daniel Berrigan to speak in the chapel, and 400 people, 50 people showed up. You were there.
I was there.
Sylvia and Gary. Denise, you didn't come? You had something better that week? And Karen, it was like St. Paul, you know, and I was 30 years old, seminarian, and he got up to the microphone in the big chapel and just opened the book of Revelation and started with the first sentence and kind of read it, and it was scary. It was thrilling. It was exciting. Do you remember the night we brought down Elder Cameron here? Do you all know who he is?
Yes.
He came, and so he's up there, he's about this tall, and he had a very Latin, you know, the famous Brazilian bishop who founded liberation theology, a total saint, and he gives this 5-minute speech. Someone raised their hand, and they said, "Dom Helder, this was just over the church." And all these memories are coming back. You faced death squads. Pope John Paul tried to remove you. Everybody hates you or loves you. You've opened up the door and someone was there with a knife. Somebody tried to kill you this time. People denouncing you. What's the greatest obstacle you've ever faced in your whole life? Tell us about it. And he goes like this. It was thrilling if you were there. so Latin. It went like this. In other words, he's his own greatest obstacle. It was such a teaching. You know, I can stand up to death splits, but I'm still trying to be nonviolent. I could go on and on with memories, and it's so nice to be here. But as you see, I'm traveling around the country talking about my new book. Somebody said, well, we know what you did during the pandemic. This is the short version. You see, it's the Gospel of Peace, a commentary on Matthew, Mark, and Luke from the perspective of nonviolence. Last week I was at Grace Cathedral speaking, and the dean said, why didn't you do John? I said, because my friend, the publisher, said, we are not publishing 1,000 pages by you. Somebody's got to stop you. So anyway, I'm traveling now for the next 6 months to 65 cities all around the country talking about Jesus and nonviolence. Wish me luck. You know, and so just for a little housekeeping, if you can stand it, I wanted, is Meg still in the room here?
Yeah.
Meg bought all these books. So everybody stand up, Meg, and let's give Meg a round of applause. So you have to each buy 5 copies. Otherwise, Meg, it's going to get violent. And then, to complicate everything, so Meg is dealing with those books, but I have another table of some of my other books over there, and that money is separate, and that will help pay my cash. Anyway, so that's what I want to say. And if I talk a little bit about the Gospels, then we'll have a little time for question and answer, but I'm around all morning and happy to meet you and talk with you and sign books and all of that. Whatever, my motto is do whatever Denise says. Gandhi and Martin Luther King used this crazy, clumsy word, nonviolence, morning, noon, and night. And nobody else does, and I love it. And I encourage you to use this word, because the times are so bad, the culture and the country are so insane, the world is on the brink and so crazy, even the language is gone. So that love has lost its meaning as a word. I love my car. Peace. Hitler was all for peace. George W. Bush was all for peace. Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize and gave the greatest speech for war in history. Everybody's for peace. What does it mean? As long as we can kill what we want. No, Gandhi and Dr. King said, ahimsa, this difficult word, and that's what I invite you to talk about. What does it mean? Gandhi said, well, minimally, it means do no harm in thought, word, or deed. How's that going for you? Good. That's just the beginning. I love to go on and think about it. I invite you to talk about it. It's active love that pursues the truth of our common unity. I said this in this room 30 years ago, that we're all one, all reconciled, already united. Already been given the gift of peace. And so we stand up and say no, and we resist every form of anything that is not of the peace of God. We resist systemic structured violence and killing and war, and allow the God of peace to disarm our hearts of the violence within us, that we can be instruments of her peace movement. And we persistently reconcile with every human being on the planet, practicing from this moment till the day we die, unconditional, all-inclusive, all-encompassing, non-retaliatory, sacrificial, universal love. Isn't that great? Sherry's going, John's got to cut back on the coffee. If you're listening to. There's just this one catch that nobody likes. This is the problem with the word nonviolence. There is no cause, however noble, no matter what they say, ever again, for the rest of our lives, from which you and I will ever again support the taking of a single human life. We don't kill people. We don't support the killing of people. We don't kill people who kill people to show that you shouldn't kill people. We give our lives to try to stop the killing of our sisters and brothers. Without a trace of the desire. I mean, we're even willing to accept suffering in the struggle for justice and disarmament without a trace of the desire to retaliate with further violence. Now, I said all this at this big conference I organized 10 years ago. I invited Jim Lawson, Dr. King's great friend, and he got up there and he said, "John doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not how Martin and I describe nonviolence." I love that. And he goes, "Martin says nonviolence." Are you sitting down? Are you ready? This is Dr. King's definition of nonviolence. Nonviolence is power. The culture, the country, everything, the TV, the world says you are powerless. There's nothing you can do, and don't think you can make a difference because you can't. Give it up. No. Gandhi and Dr. King come along and say, we have power through the power of God's love, pursuing the truth to resist and transform the world. This is the political methodology of God. Isn't that great? So I've been studying this really hard, full time. Gandhi, King, Dorothy Day, and nonviolence, like my whole life. And Gandhi talked about it, as a way of life. It's a spiritual path. It's a political methodology. He said it's the highest form of human consciousness. Now think about that. That's very powerful language. And then, Martin said Gandhi is the greatest theologian who ever lived. Right there, that's shocking. Gandhi said, I found this rare sentence, the kingdom of God is nonviolence. Think about that. God is nonviolence. So, and you, for those of you who remember Dan being here, when I was 21, so Daniel Berrigan was my teacher, and you can read my book about my long, sad story and how I ended up like this. But when I was 21, I went to see Dan, and I'll be 65 this year. And Dan said, we were talking about Pax Christi and stuff, but I wanted to ask him the meaning of life. And I was really scared and nervous. And so I was like, finally I got to the point. Dan, Father Dan, so scared. What's the point of all this again? That's what I said to Dan Berrigan. And without missing a beat, he said, all you have to do is make your story fit into Jesus' story. That's the meaning of life for me. I thought he was going to say, go end all the wars and report back to me, which is what I would have said to a young person. But later I realized what he said, is harder. Once I brought Dan to give a retreat in Pennsylvania, and there's a crowd like this, and he comes to the microphone on Friday night, and his opening words were, well, if you want to follow Jesus, you better look good on wood. And everybody was like, do you have another retreat, Master? Somebody else? So Gandhi comes along. I'm going to talk about the Gospels here, if you're with me. There's a point to my method here. And says Jesus is the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world. That's a shocking thing to say. Is he right? I think it's the only thing you can say about Jesus of Nazareth. And I've been saying to some folks, we could go on and on today about how horrible the church is, the country, the world, and have a really nice time. You see my point there? But to talk about the nonviolent Jesus is a lot harder and much better use of our time and our lives to really focus Gandhi's saying this person practiced total nonviolence unlike anybody in human history. And Gandhi said that the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, are the greatest teachings of nonviolence in the history of the world. In fact, it's the greatest writing in the history of the world, and no one had ever said this stuff before, the Beatitudes leading up to love your enemies. And Gandhi said, I want to be a person of nonviolence, so I need to read Matthew 5, 6, and 7 every day. And for the last 45 years, Gandhi read from the Sermon on the Mount every morning and every evening, and he's not a Christian. And he's a busy guy, by the way. How's that going for you? You know, are you doing that? Isn't that powerful? I actually went to India for a month with Arun Gandhi, his grandson, who was raised by Mahatma Gandhi. We went to the place where Gandhi prayed, and he showed me. That had a big impact on me. And then Gandhi says, everything he says is a scandal. He's saying God is nonviolent. God is universal love. God is a peacemaker. We don't want that. You know, we don't want the good news of nonviolence. We like a world of permanent warfare and racism and sexism and extreme poverty and 5 billion people suffering. We don't want to get involved in all that, or catastrophic climate change. We're quite uncomfortable with the bad news. It's really shocking. But what I'm saying is we Christians have so rejected this Gandhian, Kingian hermeneutic of Jesus. That's a big theology word I've learned down the road, meaning perspective. This perspective of Jesus and the Gospels, that we now worship not a God of peace, but the God of war. We believe in the anti-gospel of America, the anti-Beatitudes, the anti-Sermon on the Mount, which says, you've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. I say, nuke them all. Offer violent resistance to one who does evil. Kill your enemies. Blessed are the war makers. They are sons and daughters of America. I mean, you could really unpack the anti-Christ theology and spirituality that we're all up to our ears. But what if Gandhi and Dr. King were right? This is now we're getting somewhere. That this guy is this spectacular vision and teacher and embodiment of nonviolence. So the pandemic hit, and I decided to write a commentary on the Gospels, as you do. It's a little over the top, but I was, locked in the house and all. So I went through every line of the 3 Gospels, trying to show how Jesus is more nonviolent than Gandhi and Dr. King. And that's what it's my whole life's work. And that's what I want to talk about with you. I encourage you, you can't really read it, but it's a book to have and reference for the rest of your life. But I invite you to join my project. You see what I'm trying to do, going around the country, asking people to really reconsider. This is so beyond dealing with the church and the election of the country. This is God. And Gandhi said, we've so messed everything up that we have to help each other reimagine the nature of God. So God is not a God of violence and war, but the living God of love and peace. And there, once we begin to reimagine the nonviolence of God, we'll begin to worship, Gandhi said, the God of peace and nonviolence. And once we begin to worship a God of peace and nonviolence, only then, Gandhi said, do we become people of peace and nonviolence. Isn't that brilliant? So, can I walk through some of this with you? Would that be okay? So note the nearest exit. There may be some turbulence. That's the pilot, Denise. So you'll just have, and if, I just invite you to take a deep breath and relax. I just want to walk a little bit through the Gospels and then open up for questions. So this is kind of what I'm learning. And I ended up just loving it all so much. Matthew begins with civil disobedience and ends with civil disobedience. Did you know that? I didn't know that. The Epiphany, the story of the 3 wise men, isn't that sweet? No, it's political revolution. These people come in, all of Jerusalem and King Herod are upset. They meet the nonviolent Jesus, and what do? You change your life and resist the culture and do civil disobedience to King Herod and the culture of war. You go home a different direction. That's how the Gospel of Matthew begins. Matthew, just to say some of the obvious things, I want to walk a little bit through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if you can hang in here with me, okay? Matthew is written for the Jewish Christian community. So it's very clear, everybody agrees with this. Jesus is the new Moses. Jesus is going to give the new law, the new 10 commandments. He's the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. He's it. And that's how Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John begin with the Sermon on the Mount. And thank God, because once you enter into the Sermon on the Mount, it changes everything about Jesus, God, what it means church, what it means to be a human being, what it means to read the Gospels. Everything is Gandhi's right comes from the Sermon on the Mount. So we have these 8 Beatitudes. This is the beginning of Matthew, which I think lead up to Blessed are the Peacemakers. It's such a spectacular teaching. Blessed are the peacemakers, they will be called the sons and daughters of God. We can reflect on that till the day we die. God is a peacemaker. God is a God of peace. And in this one climactic teaching, Jesus tells us who we are. You and I are the beloved sons and daughters of God. And therefore we have to go forth and make peace. It's not painful. I remember here, writing during all those days, writing to my friend Henry Newman. And he is saying, you've got it. Well, those of you who knew me, if you think I'm striding now, I better not go tell you about it. Anyway, poor Henry, I wrote him these rough letters. When are you going to get involved more in the church? I thought you'd laugh at that, but obviously. Anyway, he was great. But I said, you tell people this. And he said, the country's too sick. They can't even believe God loves them. But I'm trying to say, yeah, God loves us, and God is a God of universal, nonviolent love. And therefore, we love everyone, and we're nonviolent to everyone, and we make peace with everyone. Then we get the 6 antitheses. You've heard it said, thou shalt not kill, right? I say to you, don't even get angry. Gandhi took that so seriously that he ended up professing a vow of angerlessness. And he ended up studying the Sermon on the Mount, saying, oh, it's so rich. I could talk for a month here. Jesus says, avoid anger and fear. Those are our best things. It's right there in chapter 5 of Matthew. It's the emotional life of nonviolence. But cultivate and practice these 2 emotions, which nobody practiced except for Gandhi, King, Dorothy Day, Merton, and all the saints. Grief and joy. That's your way forward in these times, friends. We grieve for what's happening in the world, and we rejoice with one another when we stand up for peace. Be reconciled, Jesus says. It leads up to the 5th antithesis. This is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 37, 38, 39. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? But I say to you, and here's the teaching in the Greek, memorize this with me. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Let me say it again. It's the most important sentence in the entire Bible. This is what Gandhi read that sentence twice a day. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. Someone's going to do evil to you, do violence to you. The world says you fight back with violence or run away and do nothing. And Gandhi's saying, well, if we're going to follow this guy, we got to figure out something new, where we stand our ground. We don't run away. We don't respond with the means of violence, but we engage the person with love and truth and say, put down the gun or the sword and let the God of peace disarm that person through us. The methodology of nonviolence, which Gandhi said, hey, Jesus didn't just mean this interpersonally, he means it for the whole world. and I can get the British Empire to leave India non-violently, and he does. This works. Wow. But that's not even a climax. You have heard it said, love your countrymen and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies. Agape, unconditional, nonviolent love. The people who are targeted by your nation state. It's not the neighbor you don't like. This is nation state language. Love them. And then pray for your persecutors, if you read the fine print, because that's not going to go over well. And then you're really sons and daughters of the God who lets the sun rise on the good and the bad, and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Friends, it's the greatest sentence ever written in history. I said it. No one we know ever said that before. And it's the most political, in-your-face sentence in the Bible. Love your enemies. That's way beyond end war. That's bringing down the nation-state system, because now we're all friends of every human being on the planet, right? But it's also, I think, the clearest definition of God in the whole Bible. Isn't that amazing? God lets the sun rise on the good and the bad, and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. And didn't we already agree that you and our sons and daughters of this God of universal love? What's the problem? Isn't this fantastic? I love all this. And the rest of the four Gospels is living that out. And I could talk about that all day. And I hope you will study it like I've been trying to. Matthew just does so many spectacular writings, but just to point out a few things. He's the only one who has that lovely phrase, take my yoke and learn from me in chapter 12. For I am meek and humble of heart. We know that's the biblical word for nonviolence. It's not passivity. Blessed are those who are actively nonviolent, like Martin Luther King. That's the definite. That's what Thomas Merton wrote then. He's trying to unpack the third beatitude. What's so weird is Jesus says, the deeper you go into nonviolence, the more you're one with creation. They will inherit the earth. No one ever taught me this. I only figured it out about 15 years ago. I was thinking one day, why didn't anybody ever tell me that? And then I realized, we rejected his way of nonviolence, what he called meekness. And so we're not one with creation. And so catastrophic climate change. I am gentle and humble and nonviolent of heart. I remember, forgive me for talking about my teacher so much, Daniel Berrigan. I was going on and on like this one day with him. It was an Easter Sunday. We were having a community liturgy in Central Park. Don't tell the bishops we were doing that. And I would say, if it were me and I was the savior of the world, and they tortured me and killed me, and God said I had to go back, I wouldn't go back there. I wouldn't come back down. I would be sent for 5,000 years. I thought that was pretty funny, but but it's true. We get mad over the smallest things. Jesus comes back and makes breakfast for the people who abandoned him, to which Dan said, Jesus didn't have a mean bone in his body. My point is, we are projecting our anger and violence onto Jesus in the Gospels, especially Matthew, because we think he's angry and yelling and carrying on. You brood of vipers, you whitened sepulchres. Now we're getting somewhere. That's the mean, angry, violent Jesus. Yeah, that's why we paid him. That's so we can nuke people, Truman said. And again, forgive me for name dropping, but I had to learn this through great teachers. And because of Dan, I got to know very well the great Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. You all know who he is. And I used to visit with him all the time in his various homes. And he really was gentle and nonviolent. And I remember being with him on so many occasions thinking, wow, this is what Gandhi must have been like, what Jesus would be like. Because Thich Nhat Hanh would say to me like this. Did you hear what I said? No! That's the way Jesus was. I said just now, they're all insane because they're going to blow up the planet. They're so hypocrites claiming they follow Jesus. But Thich Nhat Hanh would say it like, no one sees it, but they're just crazy. He's not yelling and screaming. What is Thich Nhat Hanh doing? I'm trying to get to the nonviolence of Jesus. He's grieving, lamenting. Everything Jesus does in the Gospels is lamentation and grief. That's how he's so nonviolent. So when Jesus leads a kind of Gandhian, Kingian campaign, according to the Synoptic Gospels, he marches from Galilee to Jerusalem into the temple, where the religious authorities are working with the empire to rip off all the money of the poor in the name of God. They have a banking system and everything. It's incredible. When he does civil disobedience, he turns over the tables of the money changers and says, no more injustice. This is a house of prayer. He doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, kill anybody, or drop any nuclear bombs. I just wanted to be clear about that, in case you were wondering. And he's not yelling. He's very peaceful and gentle. And I've been arrested about 85 times now, and I can tell you, at all your favorite military bases. And when you do that, you want to be as centered and peaceful and nonviolent as possible. Because they're going to just react with violence if you're not really nonviolent. And that's the same with Jesus. But we've not had scripture commentators or theologians who have a criminal record to explain this to us. And that's what I'm trying to do. I thought you'd laugh at that, but that didn't. Because they've never been arrested. Jesus is totally nonviolent in the temple, in all his teachings. And, just so spectacular. He's in the upper room. He takes the bread and takes the cup and says, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you. If he were a good Roman, a good American, what should he have said? Go break their bodies for me. Go shed their blood for me. That's the logic of empire, which is the logic of killing and violence. No, my body broken for you, my blood shed for you. Do this, friends. Every time we enter into the Eucharist, we're entering into the methodology of nonviolence. It's a new covenant of nonviolence. Do you see? You don't like that? They're in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the horrible soldiers, and they're going to take Jesus out. And what does St. Peter think? He's thinking, if there's ever a just war in all of human history, if violence is ever divinely sanctioned, if there's ever a moment to kill for God in the name of God, it's now. I gotta protect our guy, the holy guy, who's in danger, and he takes up the sword to kill, and he's right. We gotta kill to protect our God. And just as he goes to kill, the commandment comes down. Put down the sword. Dear friends, if you don't remember anything I say, please remember, those are the last words of Jesus to the church. That's the last thing he said to the community of men and women around him, his friends. I'm clear. It's very clear. And it's the first time they understood how serious Jesus is about this nonviolent stuff. Peter's going, oh my God, this hippie is all full of all this Berkeley love and peace and compassion. He's not going to defend himself with violence, which means we don't get to defend ourselves with violence, only nonviolence, which means we're out of here. All abandoned. And Gandhi says Jesus goes to his death in even greater nonviolence, if that's possible. And Matthew says all of that incredibly well. But just to end on the point of Matthew, he makes a big fuss about, the resurrection, because he says, they've had all these court hearings and then the trial and the torture of the nonviolent Jesus, and then they kill Jesus and they put him in the tomb, but they think maybe they're going to steal the body, the community, to say our guy is still alive. So we get these long verses saying, so they went back to Pilate, and Pilate ordered the centurion, and he brings the troops, and they get to the stone, and they put the Roman seal on the stone, the emperor, and it says, we killed you, you're dead, now stay there. You're dead, now stay dead. We order you to be dead. And so Jesus rises from the dead. Resurrection is illegal. Didn't make this up. He's breaking the law. He's still out and about causing trouble. It's resurrection is civil disobedience to the culture of death. This is the guy we follow. This is good news. We don't have to be slaves to this culture anymore. Resurrection means having nothing to do with death, which means having nothing to do with violence, which means having not a trace of violence or death within us from now on, which means as people who are trying to practice the act of nonviolence, let's say Gandhi, Dr. King, and Dorothy Day, to learn how to be like Jesus. If we want to be people who are getting ready for practicing nonviolence, that means we're getting ready for resurrection. You see, we're practicing resurrection. That's what all this is about. This gives me a lot of hope, and I love to think about all these great things. Mark is written before Matthew, has none of this. There's no new Moses, no Sermon on the Mount, no new law. It's the word immediately is used 41 times. Jesus is just like in your face. I think it's like a Tom Cruise nonstop action thriller. Can I say that? Is that a setback for Bucksters? You know what I'm trying to mean. Jesus is always on the move. He's always being chased. And again, just the first a word about Mark. The first sentence is so in-your-face political. It's shocking, and we've lost all of that. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus. What's the big deal? You know the big deal. The Roman troops are rolling through the area like the Americans, and they go into the next village and they burn everything, steal all the resources, rape the women, kill the kids, steal the men. They all have to go off and march for the Roman Empire. And they march on under the banner of Caesar. They go to the next village announcing what? The gospel of Caesar. Good news. Another victory for Caesar. We just conquered that land. Our people, our answers come along and say, excuse me, Caesar. We are announcing the gospel of Jesus. Wow. Fantastic. I'm sorry, I just get carried away. And you know, all of Mark is like that. But when I was writing the section on Mark, the day I was writing in Mark 13, the day Russia invaded Ukraine. And I'll just say a word about that because I never heard this before. And it helped me studying Mark 13. Like, who cares about Mark 13? I call it Jesus' sermon on eschatological nonviolence in a time of apocalyptic total violence. I'm trying to impress you. It's not working. In other words, go back. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives. Okay? He's done the civil disobedience. The end is near. What is he looking at? Jerusalem is right in front of him. He's taught them everything. And he says, what I say to you, I say to all. Keep watch. What? If you follow me, everyone is going to hate you. Okay? Just keep watch with me. What the heck is he talking about? It's total nonviolence. You're not going to like this. Is total non-alignment with the culture of violence and war. This gospel is written, we know, 2 to 3 years before Rome came in and completely destroyed Jerusalem. So there's dozens of rebel groups like Hamas or the FMLN roaming around trying to kill Roman soldiers. And Jesus is saying, we don't support the violence of the rebels, nor do we support the Roman Empire, nor do we support Herod and his death squads, nor do we support the religious authorities who work for Herod and the empire. We are against violence on all sides, and everyone is going to hate us and want to kill us. Do you see the total nonviolence of Jesus? That's our position in light of Ukraine, Russia, Hamas, Israel, NATO, the United States, 13,000 nuclear weapons. It's total nonviolence if you want to follow this guy. And what's so shocking about Mark is there's no resurrection. And Mark just says to the angels say to the women, well, go back to where the story begins, and then you follow up the path of Galilee, and you'll meet him along the way. In other words, you have to enter the gospel and live in the story of Jesus as a campaign of total nonviolent resistance to the culture of death. That's the way Mark is. And then you will meet the risen Jesus along the way. I think that's brilliant writing. And then you get to Luke, which is completely different again. Book 1, the second book is the Acts of the Apostles. Maybe it's written to a famous Roman politician, Theophilus, so he's trying to convert Romans, Gentiles, everybody. And he just ups the ante. I'll just begin by pointing out Luke 4. His first public speech, Jesus steps into the synagogue in Nazareth, opens to Isaiah chapter 61. The Jubilee year has begun. Closes the scroll and says, today the scriptures are fulfilled. What? That is the beginning of the permanent global revolution of nonviolence. There in Nazareth, according to Luke. And Luke is the only one who has it. Not just liberating the oppressed, sight to the blind, good news to the poor, healing to all the broken by the culture. The Jubilee year from the book of Leviticus is the total redistribution of all wealth on the entire planet. This is what I've come to fulfill. This is the revolution. Everybody who has money has to relinquish it and give it to the 5 billion starving people. It's spectacular. It's beyond our even understanding peace and justice and nonviolence, the vision of Jesus. And how do they respond? They try to throw him off a cliff. And eventually they succeed in getting him. This is the God we follow. Luke has the Sermon on the Plain, which is shorter and tougher. It's not just blessed are the poor, or blessed are those who are weeping, or blessed are those who are hungry. It's woe to you rich. You know, wow. For you who are laughing and full and carry on while all this suffering is going on. Love your enemies, love your enemies. And all of Luke builds up to chapter 10, and I'll end with this. It's so spectacular. It just says very simply, and Jesus sent 72 disciples ahead of him in pairs. He's a grassroots movement organizer. He is. Just like Gandhi on the Salt March, and Dr. King on the march from Selma to Montgomery, and all of Dr. King campaigns, Jesus is marching and building, he's like a nonviolent general, building a grassroots nonviolent movement, going to Jerusalem. I think Jesus thinks he's Gandhi. He's Dr. King. Are you up? Is it too tired? I'm the book. I am sending you out as lambs into the midst of wolves. This is the mission of Pax Christi. We are the people who are going to be total lambs, going into the culture of violence and disarming all those still stuck in the culture of wolves and boxes. We say peace to those who are near and far. We heal all the victims of the culture of violence. We expel the demons of people who are possessed by the Republican Party or nationalism or Trump. No, that's anything that is not of life and love is anti-life, anti-love. That's all it means. The demonic. We expel all of that. And we say, the kingdom of God is a kingdom. But what's so amazing is the 72 come back, Luke says, and they're all excited and happy, and they go, wow, Jesus, this stuff works. That's my translation. And it's very clear. Luke says they came back rejoicing. And Jesus says, don't rejoice because you have power over the demons and this works. Rejoice because your names are written in heaven. And so they rejoice because their names are written in heaven. And just at that moment it says, Jesus rejoiced. Dear God, I give you thanks for revealing these things to just the childlike. This is your gracious will. And I would just say, friends, for the rest of our lives, let's continue building up this grassroots movement of peace and justice that Jesus started. Let's carry on the movement of nonviolence that Jesus started, and to the abolitionists and suffragists, to the labor movement and Gandhi and Dr. King, and the thousands of grassroots movements now for the abolition of war everywhere, the abolition of nuclear weapons, the abolition of poverty and racism and executions and torture and 13,000 nuclear weapons and fossil fuels and the destruction of the earth and the creatures. Let's keep it going and be part of that grassroots movement which Jesus started. And even if you're not sure and you're discouraged and you're despairing and you want to see some results, and I encourage you to keep going, and let's keep at it just to make the poor guy happy. You see my point? It's the only time in the four Gospels where Jesus is happy, because his people went forth and fulfilled his mission of nonviolence. All of us. Maybe I'll stop there and we can have some questions, and then we will have resolved everything. Thanks for listening. You've been very nonviolent. So I just call on people, Denise? So did anybody have a comment or a question? Raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yeah, go ahead and start us off. Real loud.
Okay. What I struggle with is applying this to Ukraine.
Okay.
In the sense of when we're being attacked, you just think of that country and Russia coming in and wanting to take it over. Do they have the right to defend themselves? Can you lead me through this? I mean, we've been living this now for, over a year. So I'm trying to understand how to follow Jesus in this Ukraine situation.
Thank you so much. So that's the whole point of what we're talking about. And you have to study every single sentence, which is what Gandhi and Dr. King did. And the nonviolence that Jesus calls us to in the Sermon on the Mount is infinitely creative. But violence is very stupid and ordinary, and just go and kill people. And everybody can do that. This demands work and community, and you need God if you're going to be nonviolent. But who wants to do that? And who has that kind of faith? So, there's so many things to say. There are thousands of people in Ukraine committed to steadfast peace and nonviolence. And none of them are being talked about in the United States, nor will you ever hear about them. There's a movement called Nonviolence in Ukraine, led by this young kid. He was on Democracy Now! Do you know about him? No. And you're not supposed to. You're only supposed to be for war and killing. And we go right along with the brainwashing. Do you know about the movements of nonviolence in Russia? The thousands of people, young people, who are in prison now for refusing to kill for Putin. See, well, the point is, and I've experienced this as I've traveled the war zones in the world, once you listen to the people on the ground, not the media and the empire. The media is just the spokespeople for the culture of war. And that much. So you don't listen to them anymore. You listen to the alternative voices of peace. And they're all saying, don't bomb us, don't give us guns, we got that covered. Send us food and medicine and fund the nonviolent movements. And wherever the United States has funded nonviolent movements, wars have immediately ended, and we've had democracies and nonviolent democracies. I know that because I lived in Northern Ireland during the last year that led up to the Good Friday Peace Agreement, and we bribed both sides to end the war, and they ended it. This is not brain surgery. This works. No, it's Marissa, right?
Marita.
Marita. The war on Ukraine has been 25 years in the works, planned by NATO. And you're going, John, that's over the top. That's what Pope Francis said when the war started. If you read Pope Francis' remarks, why he was ignored in the U.S. mainstream media was he did not come out and scream and yell at Putin. Nobody supports the violence of Putin or Biden or Obama or Bush or Hitler. We're all trying to say no to war. He's saying, wait a second, look at what the NATO, under the guidance of the United States, for 25 years has been violating its own treaties, begging on this war, daring Putin, and finally it's happened. There's a reason for this, because we need war. And when we had this, Putin finally took the bait and bombed, we got rid of all our peace treaties. We're closer to nuclear war than ever, and we're moving deeper into the permanent warfare which the war makers want. If you have a country completely built on oil and weapons, you need wars to keep the thing going. So this current war. There's been so many wars now, can't even remember. Who cares about Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, places I've been. And the same with Israel and Hamas. All of this has been funded and planned. But what you're not talking about is that the Pentagon is focusing on the Great War to come. Cheney and Bush said all of this. If you want to read it, the big plan is the Great War with China that they're planning. Now, you're looking at me like, well, the whole country is about war and killing and stealing stuff for the 1%. And you and I are caught in all of this. And they have 13,000 nuclear weapons, no movement toward dismantling them. They're insane. They were headed toward that. They love catastrophic climate change. And they don't care about, say, women, poor, or children, or the unranked. It's much worse than you think. How's that for encouraging you? But Jesus is much greater than you think. And I'm quite serious about this. We have never had the research that Erica Chenoweth came out with 15 years ago. Some of you know Erica Chenoweth. She's become my friend. Right, you don't even know her even. She's this superstar intellectual now at Harvard with another great intellectual, Maria Stephan, and they raise millions of dollars, and there's social scientists, don't even ask me what that means, and they get all these teams of scholars, and they study every violent conflict and war and violent rebellion from 1900 to 2006. Think about it in the history of the world. Because, there's enough documentation. So it's all math, social science. They studied the numbers. And then they ran the numbers. These are these Harvard scholars. And they found where nonviolent resistance was used against the tyrant, the oppressor, whoever, it worked. As effectively, as much more than violence. It leads to nonviolent democracies that last. Jim Lawson says we never had this statistic before. Everything Jesus said is actually, that's why it works. King said Jesus is not an impractical idealist. He's the only practical realist. Love your enemies is the only way forward. But Erica has proven it. And so we need to tell people this and teach people the methodologies of nonviolence. We need to hold nonviolence workshops and trainings, and the Bay Area is really important. Don't get discouraged. You're thinking here, well, everybody in the country knows California. Yeah, but what happens here then has ripple effects with the whole country. You don't know the effect of sowing seeds. And so does that help, Marita?
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. So we're not going to buy the bad news that you have to have war. No, we're the ones who want war, and if you really care about Ukraine, as the people there are saying, you people dismantle your weapons. And you get rid of your nuclear weapons, otherwise they're going to nuke us. We have work to do here in the Bay Area. And so I see it that way. It's all one. And to encourage you more, I would say, what helps me lately in the last few years is, on bad days I think, well, there's no hope. You know, and it's so easy to give into despair. And I always go to my teacher, Martin Luther King. And do you know he never talked about hope in his whole life? I think because everything he did worked. You know, this was a problem from Montgomery to Selma. You know, he was having to, and then he spoke out against the Vietnam War, and his days were numbered. And it was only that last week of his life in Memphis, he started to talk about hope. And one night he stood up and said, "Tonight I'm announcing my definition of hope." You know what he said? I think it's profound. It helps me. Hope is the final refusal to give up. That's deep theology and gospel living. We're not going to give up. They're always going to tell us there's somebody we got to kill, or some war we have to support, whether it's Israel or the Hamas, or I could go on, Russia or Ukraine or Syria. Or, I mean, no. The days of supporting and killing are over for us. And we are going to be people who lift up this nonviolence of Jesus, which he called the kingdom of God, and accept it and live it and teach it and proclaim it, even in the face of the culture of death. This is what we're all going through now. So all the more reason to me keep studying the gospel and remain steadfast to Jesus' way of nonviolence, even if you don't understand it. That's why I say, okay, nothing else is working. I'm going to just throw in my chips with this guy. That's what I'm doing. Especially because these great people, Gandhi, Dr. King, Dorothy Day, Mother Teresa, Caesar, everybody said that. Caesar Chavez told me shortly before he died in town here. I said, what will I tell people if they ever ask me what should we do? He said, tell people nonviolence happens out on the streets. Do you have something else I can tell people? He said, tell people from now on, public action, public action, public action. If you care about Ukraine, get involved in public action, nonviolence, justice, disarmament, creation on the streets here in the Bay Area. That works. That sounds like Jesus. Another question.
What was Erica's last name?
Erica Chenoweth. Chenoweth. She gave an incredible TED Talk. She also gave an incredible talk at our Campaign Nonviolence Conference in Santa Fe in 2015. They're all on YouTube. But her book is called Why Civil Resistance Works, if you want to get it. And in my book, The Nonviolent Life, I have a long part about her book at the end of my book, which is on the table over there. Yes, Laura. Real loud, real loud. We still have a few minutes, Denise, and then we're going to take a nice 15-minute break.
So, I can understand why we would not be supporting Hamas and the country of Israel at this time, but in the middle are the people that are being killed, and we're kind of stuck because as we are out on the streets for ceasefire, in some ways people feel that's a violent act. You know, unless all of us are ready to go to Gaza and go south or north or wherever the people in Gaza are being pushed, what do we do about stopping the bombing in Gaza and doing whatever we need to do to get aid and humanitarian aid? I mean, this to me, I'm losing faith over. I don't want to blame only the Catholic Church, but, you know, my pastor hasn't said, let's pray for peace. Nobody's saying from the pulpit that I know. If you have a church, let me know. Okay, well, I will go to your church. So, what do we do? Do we just grieve for those people that are dying, or can we do something more active? And that's active nonviolence, as opposed to prayer, which I'm not too good at. Much more.
Yeah, it's all great. We're all going through that. Your faith is not in the church. Your faith is in the God of peace. It's a very serious point, and I'm not being flippant. The church is the building. The church is the people of God. Isn't the church the followers of the nonviolent Jesus? They're bringing the church the community of active nonviolence. That's why I'm such a big believer in Pax Christi. It should be that you get together in a group of friends like Denise and you say, okay, we're inundated, we're being told to support this war, that war, but we're going to follow, we're going to live in the peace of Christ. We're going to be the people who welcome His resurrection, give the peace. So what does that mean? Number one, you take your question to Jesus. I'm not being flippant. And all the great people I've ever talked to have told me to do that. Starting with Thich Nhat Hanh and Tutu. And by the way, they were really busy people, and Tutu was under death threat every week of his life since he was 13. And he's the one who taught me about grief and joy and the nonviolence of God, when you would expect him to be angry and yelling, and he's the one who said to the world that Israeli occupation is worse than apartheid in South Africa. Imagine the death threats he got because of what he said. No, he's on a very different level. You're always speaking out. Public action, public action, public action. Your problem should be you've got so much to do. Turn off the TV. Get rid of the newspapers. Get with a group. Pray together and march together. And figure out how and what, if you can try to align it with the best you can discern what the God of peace wants you to do, then we'll get somewhere. If it's just another ego trip, or an anger exercise, or rage, well then, don't bother. That's not nonviolence either. No, so we have to discern together and pray together and trust in the God of peace. Ask God to guide us how we can help end the war. Now, that's why I said we refuse to give up. We're not going to go away. Well, I'm not saying this well. I'm very serious about it. I do this by continuing to study Jesus and praying with friends, and I'm always in trouble. I'm always in trouble. I'm always recovering from jail. I've got a court case coming up, or jail coming up, or being banned. Was banned from 2 states yesterday. Thank you very much. No, I won't say it. I'm not going to get into it, but that's normal for me now. If you hang around Daniel Berrigan, oh my God. But they're alive, these great saints, and you want to be like them and do great things. So I can't tell you what to do. All I can say is, don't just stand there, do something, and don't just do something and stand there. And do it in all the nonviolence and love you can muster. I'll tell you 2 stories. Jimmy Carter invited me to come and spend a day with him. Wow. And that's how I got to know him. And I found out he had been made a little retreat of my writings that he was studying. So I was quite full of myself. And said, let me teach you a few things, Jimmy Carter, about peace. And I went on like that. He was as gentle and lovely as he can. And I said to him at the end, knucklehead, as my friends do. And what are you doing for peace, Mr. Carter, Jimmy? And he said to me, this was like 5 years ago. Well, I begin my day by calling the head of Hamas. I said, excuse me. He spent 15 years discussing peace with Hamas. Every single morning. None of this has been reported, and I think a lot of what is happening now is because Jimmy is dying. He was talking and teaching them, trying to teach them nonviolent resistance. And then he went on to say what the United States is doing in Korea, and what the Pentagon is really doing, and how he's doing stuff. And I left shaking. I haven't even begun to work for peace. And that's what Cesar Chavez was trying to say. John, you need to get out there. Jesus, they killed Jesus. So I can't tell you what action to take, but I can tell you go and get with some friends, ask Jesus, and go out there. Go. I'm sending you on my way, Jesus told the friends, as lambs in the midst of wolves with the message to bring the kingdom of God. Thank you. 1 or 2 other comments. One more. Yeah, real loud.
Seems to me another movement should be Quakerism and how they preach pacifism. Can you talk about that as a group and kind of why they haven't spread further?
Quakerism?
Yeah.
So she's asking about Quakers. The Quakers are so spectacular. what they did in the 1700s and 1800s, they were just like Pax Christi people in England. They were just these little people who wouldn't go away. And they weren't going to shut up. And they said, we're going to end the slave trade. And they said, you're just like 20 people in a Pax Christi group. Who do you think you are? Oh, we're following Jesus, and we're not allowed to enslave human beings. And they did it. They did it. There is no, what's the great man's name? I remember seeing a Roman who ended slavery in England. They didn't have a civil war. But it was because of the Quaker people. And I'm glad you asked about it, because it's an important question. You know, I've spoken with a lot of Quaker groups over the years, and they were the ones to tell me that we all were dying, just as the Catholic Church is dying. All the churches are dying, the movements are dying, because we're all giving up, and we're so comfortable here. We believe the bad news, that there's no difference we can make. Those Quakers in England didn't believe the bad news, and they inspired these really great people, Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison. You know, 200 years ago, William Lloyd Garrison, who was with Quaker friends in Rochester, stood up and said in a famous speech at the pulpit, "Excuse me, America." I said this last week in Grace Cathedral. Today, we are announcing the abolition of slavery. And everybody laughed at him. Yeah, you're going to get rid of slavery. You know, some people aren't people. There's always been slavery. It's in the Bible. He said, no, a new world is coming. A new world of equality. And he reclaimed the imagination of what it means to be a human being. See, what we're living through right now is the loss of the imagination. It's one of the casualties of this culture. People can't imagine a world without nuclear weapons. See, we don't even talk about that, much less preaching peace or praying for peace, talking about it in the pulpit. We're just gone. It's those early Quakers and the early abolitionists who are really our greatest teachers, because our job is way harder than theirs. We have to stand up, and you have power in the Bay Area to say, excuse me, America, we here at Pax Christi, Northern California, today announce the abolition of war and poverty and racism and executions and torture and sexism and the abolition of nuclear weapons and the abolition of fossil, the destruction of the creatures. And everybody's going to laugh and say that you're crazy. And we're saying, no, a new world is coming. A whole new culture of nonviolence. The kingdom of God is at hand. We've got Pope Francis now using this language of the culture of nonviolence. Can I say one more thing, Denise? No. It's just on the same point. Howard Zinn, I'm trying to answer your question. What's your name?
Kathleen.
I'm sorry I went on so long, everybody. Howard Zinn is the great historian who wrote A People's History of the United States. You all know Howard. And he was my friend through Dan. He came to Santa Fe shortly before he died suddenly. God rest him. And he says to me over lunch, you know, John, I've been studying all the movements of social change my whole life. Think about it. He's so famous. He invented that. The abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement of the 30s, the civil rights movement, the anti-war Vietnam movement. And he said, I finally realized that if you really study scientifically the movements, all of them have one thing in common. They were all hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. I said, really? You had to tell me that? Thanks a lot. And then he goes, I thought about it. There were always this breakthrough. Why? It's the story of the Quakers in England. What happened? In every movement of positive social change, there are good people who refuse to go away, who keep working for peace and justice, doing their 1, 2, 3, 10, 15 things every single day, taking to the streets, going to this meeting, organizing, knowing they're not going to live to see the difference they're getting in their lives. They're not going to live to see the victory. They long ago let go of the outcome and the results. They gave that to God. They are just called to be faithful to the work. And because they never went away, Howardson said, all of a sudden it moves. And nonviolence becomes contagious. This is the methodology of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. God is up there doing her big thing. All we have to do is do what Jesus said, which is be peacemakers, be prophetic voices and prophetic communities of nonviolence, and call for a world without war and injustice. Thanks for listening. God bless you all.